Why is the church interested in law? Because Jesus told us to be interested in law. Jews, Muslims, Christians, anyone who listened to Abraham, Moses, or Jesus Christ needs to be concerned about law. Because true law comes from God originally, and then men make up laws. They should have different names for these two different kinds of laws. The laws made by God and the laws made by men. In fact, the Romans did have two different words for those names. One was jus juris, which meant what was just, right, and fair, the rule of right reason, jus naturale, the law of nature. And then there was another law, lex legem. It comes from legere, meaning to bind. It had to do with consent, contracts, agreements. Pacta servanda sunt. You make an agreement, the agreements must be kept. That becomes law between the parties. So these are the two different kinds of law. When you see a lot of Latin in the Black's Law Dictionary, you'll see different phrases that mention law. And if you look down into the Latin part, you'll see sometimes that's translated law from jus juris. Sometimes the word law is translated from lex legis. Well, that's quite a bit of different meaning there. The Romans, like I said, had two different words, but in America, we create a lot of confusion because we translate those words into one single word, law. We do have words like legal system. The reason that we use the word law at all, it doesn't come from the word legal, it comes from an Anglo-Saxon word, law, spelled much different. Of course, the Anglo-Saxon words are spelled different all the time because Johnson hadn't made his first dictionary yet. But that's where a lot of the confusion comes from. But if you just keep in mind that there is a divine law, a rule of right reason, they call it, lots of different things. It includes both right reason and revelation, but basically the Ten Commandments would be law. But the systems that we create that are based upon consent and agreement, that would be a legal system. Law binds us to that because our word is our bond. If we give consent, we do create law between us. But human laws are born, live, and die. They don't last forever because we don't last forever, and they are dependent upon our agreement. Unfortunately, what binds the parents often binds the children, and therefore whole nations can go into bondage because not only did they make agreements, but they sealed those agreements in debt. Debt is a terrible thing when it comes to agreements because you can't just rescind an agreement once you go into debt. And so we need to understand these principles. The concept of person. Person is a member. Individual is not necessarily a person. All men are not necessarily persons, although all persons may be men. These concepts are repeated over and over again in the law, and they are the dots. And if we are to connect the dots, we need to have all the dots, or at least enough of them, so that as we begin to connect them, we get a complete picture. Ordinary citizens living on his farm, owned in fee simple, untroubled by any relics of feudalism, untaxed save by himself, saying his say to all the world in town meetings, had gained a self-reliance, wrestling with his soul and plow on weekdays, and the innumerable points of the minister's sermon on Sundays and meeting days. He was becoming a tough nut for imperial system to crack. The nut has been cracked. We do not live on land in fee simple. We live on land we have legal title to. There's that word again. It's not a lawful title, although a legal title in some ways is a lawful title, but it brings in an agreement with a third party. And a legal title, as an example, just the definition, legal title, that's what everybody has. You go buy a piece of property for $400,000, you got a legal title. Right, you own it, right? Do you own the beneficial interest of that property? No. Legal title is an apparent title that carries with it no beneficial interest. No beneficial interest. What is the beneficial interest? It's defined as the right to use the property. In any case, it's the antithesis of equitable title, and equitable title is the one whom the law considers to be the true owner of the property. How did this come about? Well, you can't pay a debt with a note, so you probably never paid for the property. You discharge the debt, but a portion of the debt remains. The property is probably deeded to you, and deeds has nothing to do with sovereign individual right to own property. You're not a freeholder in law of the property. As a matter of fact, you're heavily encumbered. You are so encumbered that if you stop paying the property tax for a couple of years, in most states, they will take that whole property away from you, sell it, and keep the money. You will never see a dime of the whole property because you didn't pay rent. That's right. You just paid $400,000 for a piece of property that you're renting. Are men the property of the state, or are they free souls under God? This same battle continues throughout the world today. As I've said many times, if you look in the Oxford Dictionary and many other places, a freeman is someone who has a freehold title in land. He is not someone who has a legal title to land. He is not someone who has been deeded property. He actually owns it. He owns it in fee simple, allodium, land patent, whatever. A lot of people I know people who have bought huge sums of money. They have bought land patent packets from guys who claimed they owed no taxes on their land because they had a land patent. They said, I haven't paid taxes on this land for 10 years. We investigated. His mother was paying the taxes every year. He hadn't been paying them, so he was telling the truth, but he was actually defrauding people out of evidently hundreds of thousands of dollars. Same thing goes on with another fellow whose father is paying the taxes, claiming that his land is off the tax rolls. It's just not that simple, not that easy. You have to turn around. You have to change as a people. You have to start taking your responsibilities back. You have to come together and bind yourself together as a nation by nothing more than faith, hope, and charity. Yes. The ultimate ownership of all property is in the state. Individual so-called ownership is only by virtue of government. Do you own anything? No. You own it by permission of the state. Why? Because you've changed your relationship with the state. You've done that because you've looked to the state, prayed to the state, applied to the state for all your needs, just like the Israelites applied to Pharaoh. And they didn't own their own property. They had to pay a portion of their labor to the government every single year. All the gold and silver was in the hands of the Pharaoh. A little bit was out there in circulation, but they couldn't use it as money. All this applies to U.S. citizens today and most citizens throughout the world. You are not free. Your freedom is an illusion. You're in bondage. Realize that. Repent. Change your ways. Turn around. Go another way. And you will eventually find that liberty under God where the milk and honey, the beneficial interest, will be yours and your children's and your children's children. But remember, the slothful will remain under tribute. Only the diligent shall bear rule.